So, first of all, thank you guys for tuning back in to The Voice of the Broken. This is, I think, episode 15. I have missed the last 2 to 3 weeks due to back pain. I'm recording in my gaming room right now, which is not a very luxurious look. I don't have fancy lights. I'm recording on an actual webcam instead of an expensive camera. I'm using a normal mixer. This is literally where we play video games on Twitch. I am sitting on a fucking yoga ball because this is the only thing that doesn't hurt my back. And I don't want to let this go too long without giving you guys content. So without further ado, I'm just going to jump into this. This comes from an emailer. This is 13 pages. This does not have a title. I'm going to adjust this just a little bit so that I don't have to get into the microphone. Okay. I just want to say before I get into my story that I've been listening to your podcasts and TikToks for a while now. And both of you have become an inspiration for how I want to live my life and a great example of the person I want to be. Now to my story. 2017, I was a sophomore in high school. I was just your semi-normal 14-year-old with ADHD. I had no prior hardships despite living in a split family household. I had plenty of friends. I was a hardworking student and even competed in the Raider team for our school's JROTC program. Everything was normal in my life until October 17th, 2017. That's when things went downhill drastically. For some backstory, I was in an honors chemistry class, which meant that I was mixed in with some of the juniors. I was paired with one of those juniors as my lab partner. We spent months making science experiments, even staying later after school to study and prepare for the tests for upcoming projects. As the time went on, we became better friends. We would confide in each other about our home life as kids do, and let's just say she didn't have the greatest home life. It had never been the biggest issue until one day she vanished. Stopped showing up for school, and no one could get a hold of her. Her parents were extremely worried because as far as they knew, she ran away and cut herself off from everyone. Of course, after hearing this, I was very worried, but in the end, there was nothing I could do but wait and hope she'd come back. Although I had hoped to see her again, I would end up getting that wish, but in the worst possible way. October 17th was the day that it happened. It started out a normal Tuesday, but after school was our Raider practice. After the bell rang, we all met in the JROTC room. School ended at 3:30, and by 3:40, we were dressed and out the door for our competition training. Today was different. Our commanders were out front for the day, and one of our teammates was late. Because our commanders were late, another junior and I were nominated as commander and co-commander for the day. Eventually, our teammates showed up, and we were out the door by 3:45. Every Tuesday and Thursday, we walked across campus to the pavilion in the far corner of the school property where we have trails for running and workout equipment ready for use. We had 8 people with us that day, four freshmen, 2 sophomores, and 2 juniors. We all started walking to the pavilion, which is about a quarter of a mile away. As we were walking, I noticed a woman sitting on one of the benches below the pavilion. My commander told me to go ahead and run over and let her know that we'd be working out there, and this is where things got bad. As I was approaching, I noticed something was off. I didn't know if it was a tree or some equipment hanging from the rafters. I stopped and asked my commander, and he'd started yelling, telling everyone to get up against the baseball field wall and look away. It was a large sheet metal wall, so you couldn't see anything. He grabbed me, and we ran over, and it was her. My lab partner was hanging by the rafters of the pavilion. She did it in such a way that she looked like she was sitting down, but she was barely off the ground, held up by the rope around her neck just enough to asphyxiate her. My commander yelled at the other sophomores to go to get our teacher and call 911 while we got her off the rope. We tried CPR over and over, but nothing would work. Dreading what was happening, I felt as my world was collapsing. I could hear my heart rate, and I couldn't breathe. Finally, after moments of trying, the ambulance came and took over. Everyone was staring at the ground with a panicked look on their face. No one would look anyone in the eye, and if they did, you could almost stare right through them. Everything got worse when one of the EMTs was talking to instructors and said that we were about 5 minutes too late to resuscitate her. We were held there for hours, sitting in small circles, until one by one we were questioned by the police. Myself and my commander questioned the most due to our direct contact with her. The police ended up calling our parents to come pick us up. My mother was the last one to show. I remember parents holding on to their kids practically in tears, thankful that they were okay. Sadly, my mother didn't do that. I hopped in the car, and all she said to me was, "When I got the call, I figured you'd be the one dead, not the girl." Wow. I didn't say a word, and it was silent all the way home while I stared out the window. We finally got home and I just walked to my room. No one asked if I was okay. No one seemed to care. I laid on my bed for hours staring at the ceiling, unable to eat or drink. I just laid there in a daze until I passed out from exhaustion. I woke up the next morning hoping it was all a dream. I put my clothes on, hopped into my stepbrother's car so we could get to school. It was silent too until he said, "I'm glad I was at work yesterday and not at Raider practice." I heard that and I was seething with anger, but I said nothing. We finally got to school and I walked to class. Everyone was talking about it in halls, gossiping amongst themselves and everything that happened. Left and right, someone had a new story. People started making stories that the baseball team had found her or that the football team found her. All the while, the school attempted to keep everything under wraps. Class after class, it only got worse. By the time I was in fourth period, I could barely stand being in class. But as I was sitting there, I got an email from my teacher. I guess she was worried about me. She had been watching me all period with a blank expression on my face. You were disassociating. This is a very common thing after people go through traumatic experiences, believe it or not. Even though we were only a couple desks apart, we emailed back and forth. She asked me if I was part of all the commotion and comforted me in the best way she could. We ended up emailing for a good 30 minutes until I started picking up on a conversation beside me. This smug kid wouldn't shut up about it. Over and over, all the things people said at the moment itself was replaying in my mind. My fists were balled and I could barely keep my composure when all I heard out of that kid's mouth was, "Who cares if a random girl died? My grandmother died and you don't see me bitching about it." Kids are cruel and they lack compassion and empathy and understanding. And these statements are things that they have heard other people say and they're just regurgitating it. It's not like there was any thought put into that. This is the downside of people watching TV and hearing things and want to emulate those characters that they see on TV shows. This is a problem. Anyways, at that moment, I got up from my desk and yelled at him, telling him to shut the hell up. All he could do was smile back, and that was it. All of that anger and anxiety I was pushing down all came out at once, and I didn't care that he was twice as big as me. I had the biggest smile on my face when I broke his nose. He ended up going to the nurse's office while my teacher walked me to the principal. We stopped before I could get to the office, and she just told me we can't hit other students like that, even though he deserved it. I still have to take you to the office. We kept walking after that and sat down waiting for the principal. We sat in his office for a good 30 minutes, interrogating me on what happened, why I did it. And at that point, I was a little more calm, but still panicking on the inside. And all I could say was he deserved it. Principal, of course, knew what happened the day prior, so he let me off easy with after school detention. So I had to go back to class. As soon as I walked through the door, I could feel all the eyes of everyone in the room piercing my soul. I felt disgusted with myself, and everyone else did too. People started staying clear of me like something was wrong with me. It's because people are uncomfortable with confrontation. Like I was some sort of monster, so unhinged that if anyone got near me, I could just snap. Class finally ended in after a couple minutes, and I was the first out the door. My next class was JROTC, so I thought maybe after the horrible day I had, I'd find some welcoming faces there. Unfortunately, none of the faces I was met with were welcoming, and none of the people from the day prior were there. I was the only one to actually come on that day. And I still wish I never walked in. Because of the incident happening during a JROTC event, our instructor had to give an entire seminar about suicide, which didn't settle my stomach at all. I just sat with my head down in silence while everyone around me murmured to themselves. Class finally ended after what seemed like an eternity, and I rode the bus home. But just like my classes, no one sat with me or near me. They all just kept passing glances at me while I stared at the seats. I want to talk about this real quick. You are putting yourself in you had a traumatic experience, right? This sucks. This is not anything that a child should ever have to experience. But while you are dealing with what you're dealing with here, there's a whole bunch of other kids that had to sit through a seminar about suicide. And while that didn't settle your stomach, those kids may have also needed that. And it's important to recognize that even though you're going through a traumatic experience, you're not the center of the universe. There are other people that are involved in this. There's a whole lot of other people that may have been hurting or going through what they were going through. And yes, she was your friend, but things like this affect children across the board. I remember having kids die when I was at school, and it affected the whole school. They would bring therapists in and shit. So while you were looking for compassion and empathy for others reading this, you are not having compassion and empathy for others in the interim. So it's important to recognize that. And I'm not shitting on you for not having compassion or empathy. This is obviously a traumatic experience for you. I'm just trying to give you a perspective that you may not have had. Just stared at the seats in front of me, begging for this horrible day to be over. Once I got home, I felt a little refreshed, but not much. My parents didn't say a word or even look at me. I felt like I was invisible, or worse, they thought the same as the kids in school. They knew about me breaking the kid's nose, but didn't say anything to me. I just walked past and hid in my room. They realized that you were going through something, and they didn't want to punish you for what you did. At that point, I felt like nothing could get worse, but I was worried about everyone else. I texted everyone that was there with me during the incident just to see how they were doing. In my head, I was hoping that they were feeling just as I was so that I could have someone to talk to or relate to, but I was wrong. Everyone I talked to couldn't sleep, barely ate, they could do nothing. Dude, you could have talked to any of them. Just because somebody's not going through the same thing that you're going through, your friends are supposed to be there for you. You should have reached out and initiated a conversation. As you were checking up on people, you should have tried to bring that conversation up for other people. If you guys ever go through this or a traumatic experience where you're checking on other people, if you feel the need to talk to somebody, talk. Get it out. Don't wait on somebody to ask you if you're okay. Sometimes you have to force the conversation. Somebody's going to listen to you eventually. Every time they tried to sleep, they were stuck with the image of her hanging by the rope, no matter how little time they saw it in person. It was so bad I headed over to the sophomore's house and held her while she cried in my arms. I didn't know what to do. I was only 14. I didn't know what was going on. All I knew at that point was to hold on tighter and help everyone as best as I could. Days went by of the same routine with more and more people distancing themselves from me. Like I was cursed in every class, and even lunch, people would walk past or seclude themselves from me. The only people that I really even communicated with were the people I was with that day. I wonder why you feel like this is the case. Like, did you isolate and this is a perceived thing? Because just because you found a body doesn't mean that people are going to remove you from social circles. This is such a weird email. Or that's such a weird thing, I guess. I felt horrible that everybody else was bedridden, stuck with that image in their head, but for some reason I didn't get any of that. I felt like I was some sort of monster for not having any of the symptoms that they had. It's not symptoms, it's trauma. I truly felt like I was so fucked up in the head to not feel the way that they did, and in hindsight, that's what made everything worse. People started showing up more and more. They started to gain the courage to finally show their faces in school, but nothing was the same. You guys, people process trauma differently. There would be moments where we would have to step out of class just from hearing the slightest thing about it, and some shoved it so far down that they were just a husk. But people didn't care. No one did, and that's where I felt like I had to step in, because if I'm not feeling it, I should be the one responsible for helping these people. One of the worst was a freshman before everything happened. He was a happy-go-lucky guy who always had a smile on his face. I came to the lunchroom one day to see him laughing with some friends. I thought it was wonderful till I saw his face. I could see how much he was pushing it down and trying to distract himself. I went up to him and asked him if he was okay. He blew it off, but I knew what was wrong. I motioned him to hug him, and he practically tackled me. He fell to the ground in tears, just as kids, scared and afraid and unable to process anything that was going on. People looked at us like we were weird, and they looked at me with hatred in their eyes. Depression seeped into all of us, and most of us got the help that we needed. I did not. I acted out of my character, or often general. It was blamed on my ADHD medication. They tell me how I wasn't taking it, or it wasn't strong enough. On Friday, 3 days after the incident, my parents dragged me to the doctor's appointment to up my dosage. They put me on 72 milligrams of Concerta, which is the recommended dosage for ages 18 to 65. It made me feel horrible, adding to the already intense insecurity of being a messed up monster. This is why you need therapy. At that point, all I knew was the people at school thought something was wrong with me, and so did my parents. And eventually I believed it. I spent the next weekend getting used to my medication. It made me sick. I felt depressed, full of anxiety, made all the symptoms that I was showing worse. Part of me thought it was a good thing. Maybe the meds, maybe the medication can make me more normal. Maybe it'll make everyone see me as less of a monster, but of course it didn't. None of it stopped. Come Monday, I found out that one of the women in my squad overdosed in the bathroom. People took it as an omen and blamed it on me. I don't believe that. I don't believe that people blamed it on you. I'm sorry, but there's things in here that I believe is your cognitive bias or your trauma speaking. I don't know. Maybe it's all real. Kids are cruel fucking people. This just doesn't make sense to me. In their minds, I was cursed. Wherever I went, someone died, and that made it all worse. Before, people stayed distance but now, never. It's like they had fear in their eyes for no reason. I know now that I had nothing to do with it, but back then I didn't know what to think. It was easier to just blame it on myself. I tried to involve myself with other people, enjoying conversations, to just reach out, but nothing. I had old friends tell me that they didn't want to be around me because they didn't want to end up dead like everyone else. Okay, this is just fucking kids being cruel then. Eventually, I secluded myself. I didn't talk to anyone or do anything with anyone else. I just gave in to all those thoughts that were getting heavier and heavier as the week went on. Started taking extra pills every day, hoping it would make me feel better, but it made me sick. My mother and stepdad didn't care. They barely noticed. I continued to do that once the weekend come around, except that weekend I visited my biological father. Now, I didn't like my dad. I was raised with my mother telling me how horrible I was and how horrible he was, and how he's not good enough to be around me. After hearing that for 14 years, I started believing it. This is why parents need to fucking not talk shit about the other parent. I hated him for no reason other than my teenage angst and the programmed thoughts my mother convinced me of. Yep. But despite all of that, I still went to my dad's. He picked me up. He knew something was wrong from the beginning. He kept asking me what was wrong. And I kept blowing him off, saying nothing's wrong. We finally got home, and I couldn't wait to just hide in my room at that point. 2 weeks after the incident, I was done. I could barely sleep, but all I could think about was how pathetic I am and how much of a monster I am. That Saturday night, I went to the stairs, grabbed my meds from the counter. I went downstairs, grabbed my meds from the counter. I planned to do it. I was done. I was in tears. I was going through so many emotions I didn't know what to think of at all, but all these things kept rattling in the back of my head, pushing me further and further to do it. At that point, I had enough. I emptied the pill bottle into my hand, had my bottle of water, and I was ready. What I didn't know was that my dad was downstairs and noticed the pill bottle was gone and rushed upstairs and found me as soon as I was putting them in my mouth. I remembered my dad rushing over as fast as he could and just grabbed my mouth and forced me to spit it out. I was in tears, and so was my dad. He didn't know what was going on, nor what caused all of this. All he knew was to hold me and not to let go. I was practically in a daze. I was in tears. We stayed there for about an hour before I calmed down. Of course, when I calmed down, he was a little angry and kept asking what I was thinking and all of that, and then I told him. I thought he was mad before. He was furious now. He stormed out of my bedroom, taking the pills with him. I didn't know what was going on, and all I could hear was him screaming at my mother through the phone. Apparently, my mother didn't care enough to tell him. Years later, I asked him what she said, and her only response was, "It wasn't a big enough deal to tell you. It's not like he is the one who hung himself." My dad was furious. I never saw him that angry before in my life. But there he was, and at the time I was confused. I figured he didn't care, but obviously he did. My dad, after calming down, finally came up to my bedroom and sat with me. He told me that the way I reacted meant nothing and that some people just handle things differently than others. He tried to tell me stories about some people who were around when he was a ranger. He'd tell me about some of the men, how they acted after returning from tours, and how some of them would seem to have nothing wrong with them while others could barely talk without panicking. This is what I meant earlier by the way that people process trauma. Everyone processes that shit differently. You said this happened in 2017. It's 2024, so this is what, 7 years ago? You were 14 at the time, so you're 21 now? Okay, so this is obviously still at 21 fucking with you. You need to go to therapy, bro. You need to find somebody to fucking talk to, because this still being a problem for you and you still being hung up on this and feeling the way that you feel, assuming that you do, you need to process your shit. He ended up staying there until I passed out and woke me up the next morning. He threw some clothes on me and told me to get him outside. Groggily I did. Barely able to see straight from the night before, but I did it anyways. I walked out the back door and he threw me a hammer and put me to work. He told me that what I went through was a lot, and there's no real way to handle it. But we are going to work through it together. He called my mother later that day and they let me stay home for a week. We built fences and we worked. He brought me books to read that would help me better, and even took me off my medication. He knew it wasn't helping me and only made things worse. It was a lot to deal with at the age of 14, but my dad pretty much carried me from the bottom of the hole I was stuck in, taught me ways to cope, new ways to help with my ADHD, and completely diverted the path my life was going, but in a much better way. He's the entire reason that I'm still kicking today, and I can't be more thankful. This is not quite what I'm looking for with the Voice of the Broken stories, guys. I'm going to let this go, and I'm going to use the email anyways because I just spent 20 minutes reading it. I want stories of people's hardships and what they've gone through and how they've improved their lives. So like your dad puts you to work and you use work to improve your life, or are you still dealing with this? I don't know where you're at. Like, I want your guys' stories. This is just a traumatic event. That's a trauma dump. I hope that it made you feel better, but that's not what we're doing with this podcast. All right. I should probably read these before I read them to you guys, but in the event that they affect me emotionally, I don't want to fucking take that away. I want it to be here. So, all right, this one's called My Story of the Voice of the Broken. Just want to start off by telling you and Peaches, thank you for all you guys do. I'm a fairly new listener, but everything I have heard so far has helped me one way or another. Not really sure how to tell my story because it's a long one, so let's get into it. 9 pages. Okay, I'm 29, and to get to the darkest time in my life, I'm pretty much going to have to start at the beginning. You don't, because things that happened to you at 18 months is not something that's going to affect you when you're fucking 20. My mom abandoned me when my dad was, my mom abandoned me and my dad when I was 18 months old due to a drug addiction he had shortly after I was born. My dad got full custody of me in their divorce, and just to add a little more information, they were young. My dad was 24, my mom was 19. Most of my childhood through my early teen years, my dad was there, but not there because of work. That's most men. He was self-employed trying to run a paint and body shop, and on top of that, he himself had a lot of demons he was dealing with at the time. It led to a meth addiction that lasted from the time I was 5 to the time I was 15. That's rough. My grandparents on my dad's side stepped in to raise me early on, and like I said, my dad was always there, but not there, if you know what I mean. I do know what you mean. It's there, but not present. That's how I think you meant to word that. He never got to live at the house. He lived at the shop due to my grandparents trying to limit my exposure to my dad's problem. I did get to stay with him on the weekends, and I always looked forward to that. When I was around 6, my mom started keeping regular contact with me the best she could. She lived out of the state, so she would call once a week on Sundays. That's pretty much the story of my life until middle school. Fast forward to middle school, I was in 6th grade. I went to school on a Friday, February 10th, 2007. It was like a normal day until that evening. Excuse me. Damn. My dad came to the house that night like it was normal, but I could tell something was up. He sat me down and told me my mom had passed. Being 12 years old, that news just didn't seem real. I started to cry, and that is also the first time in my life I saw my dad cry. I went down to Texas the next day for the funeral with my grandparents from my mom's side. I have seen and had contact with them, but all my life. I have seen and had contact with them all my life. The funeral is the first time I remember seeing my mom. I didn't know what she looked like because Dad got rid of the pictures of her after their divorce. Seeing her for the first time like that, laying in her coffin, knowing I would never hear her voice again or ever have a hug from her, hit me like a sledgehammer and broke me. It's fucked. After that, I pretty much shut down and became a recluse. Stopped talking to all my friends at school, didn't really talk to my family. They all tried asking me if I was okay, but I just kept telling them yeah. By 7th grade, I had already started drinking from time to time and started smoking cigarettes. Then one day in one of my classes, I met a girl, and little did I know at the time, but she would eventually become my best friend and future wife. She started to get me to kind of talk again. We never really had any serious conversations. We did get to know each other a bit and realized we had a lot of common interests. We stayed friends through middle school and never went any further than that. Fast forward to 9th grade. Her and I remained friends, didn't really talk much as we used to because we didn't have any classes together. And by this point, she had her friend group and I had mine, so my so-called friend group, it was mainly just us hanging out, drinking, and smoking weed. At this point, I was really starting to see I was self-medicating. Okay. At this point, I was self-medicating. This is you acknowledging it. Got it. My dad got busted around this time frame also. He got hit with a meth charge, got 3 years of drug court. He lost the shop, moved into my grandparents' house, and started working on his sobriety. 10th grade, my dad and I had been working on our relationship. He was really trying hard to be the dad I needed. It felt great. I was still doing my own thing, but not as much. A friend I made at school outside of that group I was hanging out with, invited me to go to church with him and his mom. I had been in and out of church throughout my life, and I said, sure. Started going, and the mental health started getting better, and I started building a good spiritual foundation. There was a girl in my youth group I started kind of talking to. We started talking outside of church, and before I knew it, we moved into the courting phase, or what I knew of it at that time. Started dating, and it felt like I was in a good place in my life. Started opening up to her, and haven't done that with anyone since my mom passed. She made me safe and cared about. Then a month into our relationship, she broke up with me out of nowhere. She said it was because of her parents, that they didn't want her dating anyone. She said She said she was devastated, and I was too. Little did I know the games this girl was going to play on me. A few weeks after we broke up, she started calling me again, talking sweet and all that shit. Then found out later she was messing around with my friend, or who I thought was my friend. My mental health went down the tubes. Found out I wasn't in a good place. At the time, I thought it was all because of her, but it wasn't. I was still dealing with the shit from my mom. It's because healing takes a lot of fucking time. I quit eating, stopped talking to everyone again, and this time I started doing self-harm. My dad was seeing what was going on, but didn't really want to talk to him about it because he was dealing with his own stuff. At this time, he was still in drug court, but was also in culinary school, and I didn't want him losing focus on either and possibly relapsing. 11th grade church girl and I had been on again, off again for about a year now. We were together. It felt great. When we weren't, my mental health would fall apart all over again. And every time I would go back to the same stuff I was doing with some new extreme. Finally, she ended it with us. And at one point, and I said, fuck it, I'm done. This is you living your life with the validation of other people. This is what happens when you don't have proper structure and love from your parents, and you don't have self-worth developed in you as a child, right? And I'm not shitting on you. I'm not shitting on your parents. This is what this looks like. All of these people who are good when they're codependent of other people, and the other people are the ones that are making them feel like they're enough, and then they leave their life and now they're not enough again, and then somebody else comes along and they feel good about themselves and they're living life like your internal worth is fucked. The validation that you seek from other people to make you feel good is the only thing that's keeping you alive. You guys have to find reason to live for you and only you. I went home that evening after church one Wednesday and put in my mouth and that my grandpa had given me a few years ago. I was ready to be done with it. I was sick of feeling like it didn't matter, like I didn't matter to anyone. I missed my mom for what I knew of her, and I just kept wishing she was still here so I could talk to her and get the closure I really needed with her. The only way I thought that was possible was to end it so I could finally be with my mom. I was sitting there ready to pull the trigger when I heard a voice in my head say, "Don't do this. This is not the way." Sounded like my mom's voice, but I don't know if it was her or God watching over me that night. A month or two goes by, and this school year, my middle school friend and I have classes together again. We're sitting in class one day and started talking, and this time it wasn't like any other time we've talked. We had a deep conversation right there in the classroom. First time we have ever done that. Prom was coming up a couple months down the road, and she told me that she was wanting to go and didn't have anyone to go with her. I told her I would go with her. After that, we started hanging out a lot more at school and outside of school. The more we talked, started to fall in love with this girl. She's a very down-to-earth person, very caring. Eventually, I popped the question if we could start dating. She said yes, so we started dating and having a relationship. A little over a month into our relationship, I was feeling the best I had felt in a long time. It was nice having someone who genuinely cared for me and loved me. At the time, I didn't know it, but she knew all about my mental health issues because she had her own from stuff going on in her home life. 2 weeks before prom, and I got a call on my phone. I didn't know the number, so I answered it, and to this day, I wish I hadn't. It was church girl. Should have just hung up, but I didn't. We got to talking, doing like the whole catching up thing. It didn't stop there. Like I said, she knows how to play mind games. Long story short, I ended up cheating on my girl. Okay, you just blamed. Where's your accountability, bro? Where's the accountability in this? You could have simply said, so I answered it, and to this day, I wish I hadn't. Church girl was there. I should have just hung up, but I didn't, and I cheated. That's it. All of she manipulated you, she's mind games, whatever, none of that matters. This is a you decision. You made that choice. Everything that she did leading up to that, or the reason that you did that, doesn't matter. You made a decision. That's what you need to say. It didn't stop there. I made a decision. I cheated on my girl. And felt like the biggest piece of shit afterwards. Now you learned a lesson, right? So this is one of those things where you have remorse, regret, but you learn something from it. Don't do that shit no more because now you feel bad about it, right? I told my girl the day it happened and she was willing to stay with me, but I couldn't look at her the same. I broke things off with her because I knew it couldn't be and wasn't what she needed. I couldn't be and wasn't what she needed. So you're saying that doesn't make sense to me. You told your girl that you cheated on her. She was willing to accept it and take you back and work through what was going on, but you felt so much remorse and guilt that you decided to break up with her. 12th grade, I don't remember much, mainly because I stayed fucked up all the time. Whether it was alcohol, weed, pills, you name it, I was probably on it. I do remember that school year my dad finally finished drug court. We were sitting at the house that night, and he and I were talking, and I let him know how proud I was of him. I also tried to let him know I was struggling mentally, but I didn't really know how to communicate. I also did mention to him I was thinking about dropping out of high school. He told me I was going to finish school and graduate. He said if he could pull his head out of his ass and turn things around, I could too. I took what he said and ran with it. I started doing better in school. I did graduate, barely, but I did. Graduation day was a pretty good day. Had family come to town on my mom's side, kept the drugs and alcohol to a minimum. That evening when graduation was over, I went and found my family and my dad and gave a big hug. Told me he was proud of me. That was the first time he'd ever said that to me. It's such a good feeling. After high school, I went right to work looking for a job. I knew I didn't want to work fast food or some bullshit like that. Ended up getting a job at an auto repair shop in the next town over. It was just a small shop run by this old man, took me in, started teaching me things, and I loved it. My boss became my mentor and kind of that father figure, taught me not only to work on cars and boats, but work ethic. About a year into working there, I'd finally made enough money to get my own place. I rented a house in town I was working in the town I was working in, got moved in, and it felt good to kind of have a new environment to be in. As good as things were going for me, little did I know I was about to have some life-changing shit happen. I'd been living and working in the town I moved to for a little over a year. My drinking and drug use had slowed, mainly because I was staying busy with work, but the other part is I was still under 21 and didn't have anyone to buy alcohol for me. Then we got a new guy working at the shop, a little bit older than me, and we started hanging out. Some time went on and he wanted to move in with me to be close to work. I said, sure, wish I didn't, because I come to find out he was an alcoholic and had a meth addiction. Anyway, I started drinking again and started doing dope. It was this way for over a month until one day my roommate coworker never showed back up. He went to go to get cigarettes one night and I never saw him again. To this day, I still don't know what happened to him. By this point, I was in full addiction. I quit talking to my family because of my dad's history, and I wasn't working as much because work at the shop had slowed way down. I was living alone, didn't have any friends, and really didn't have anyone to talk to. I was hanging out at the house one day when I got a knock at the door. It was one of my neighbors. He was trying to invite people to his church he was going to and was really involved in. We got to talking and could probably tell I needed help. Said if I needed anything to give him a call. A few days later, I took him up on that. I had a mental fucking breakdown the night before I called him. I had just finished a fifth of Jack, done a couple lines of dope. I don't know what it was about that night. I just looked in the bathroom mirror and just started losing it. Then the thought of my dad popped in my head. I saw what he had to do to deal with it and got clean, to get clean. At that moment, I knew I had a choice. Keep doing what I'm doing, ended up in prison or dead, or get clean. Flushed the dope and started getting clean the next day. Started going to church. We would talk about scripture. He was there when I had no one else. I fully believe that God put Charlie in my life to help me get through the demons I was dealing with. I believe he probably did. At this point, I've been clean for a little while. This was July of 2016. I was sitting at home one evening after work at the shop and decided to get on Facebook. I was bored, saw people started looking and found my old girlfriend's profile, the unproblematic one. Thought about it for a minute, sent her a friend request. A couple days later, she accepted it, and we started talking again. We talked for a couple of weeks, got caught up in each other's lives. Then the conversations got more deep, and the next thing I knew, we were back together. The next thing we knew we were back together. I moved back to the town I was from to be closer to her, and we started and still worked at the shop. That January of 2017, we decided to move in together. Found a different job, one that had a steady paycheck, and by late February, we got an apartment. Bought our first house in 2018, got married in that June. Found my dream job in 2019 as an aircraft mechanic, and in 2020, we had our first child. It was hard and fucked up road to get to where I am now, but I can honestly say that I'm happy. My relationship with my wife is fucking amazing, and the relationship with my family is good too. Sorry if this was so long, Chris. Wasn't my intention. Just a lot of information to get to the end. I still deal with my demons from time to time, but nowadays I know how to deal with them. What happened in the past is that. This is called acceptance, guys. What happened in the past is that. It happened. It's not it is what it is, because most people use that statement to just kind of, it is what it is, whatever, go away. That's acceptance. If you truly are, it is what it is. That happened. And you accept that it happened. It's a whole lot easier to move past what happened. You're not stifling it down just to process this shit later. You can't fix it or change it. You just have to learn how to adapt and overcome. If it would be okay, I would like to talk either phone or email. No, we don't do that. Until we start doing coaching and I'm doing something like that as a job, I'm not trying to do phone calls or private emails. You can join the men's group on Patreon. That would probably be the closest way to have access to me if you guys would like to do that. But I want to touch on a couple things. This is only a 40-minute episode. I'm not trying to do a whole lot of time today. I just wanted to get something up for you guys. I want to talk about accountability. And I want to talk about recognizing where you're throwing blame and shade on other people. You can't control the decisions that other people made that may have affected your life. That shit happened. If you let this dude move in and he happened to be a meth addict, the fact that he's a meth addict is a byproduct of the story. You let this dude move in without doing your research to find out the kind of man he was. The relationship that you had where you cheated on your girl with the fucking church girl because the church girl was a manipulative psycho, or however you wanted to word that, you made a decision to act. You regretted it. Then you made a decision to break up with your girl. Those are all you decisions. You can't place the blame on other people for the actions that you decided to make. You had information. You analyzed that information. You made a choice. It is what it is. It happened. I regret it. I'm moving on. When you tell stories, that's how you need to tell them. I did blah, 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 blah. What other people may have done to you is nobody's concern because you're not responsible for them, and the people that you are interacting with may not know them and are not responsible for them either. You did this. If people go, well, why did you do that? Then you involuntarily give that information. I understand that this is a life story. I'm not saying not to do that when you send these emails. I'm telling you that, and just general, you are only responsible for you guys. With that being said, episode 15 of The Voice of the Broken, I'm going to wrap this up. May do episode 16 one day, maybe not. Don't have a whole lot of emails more going through. And when the emails stop coming in, I'm definitely going to stop the episodes. Have a good day, guys.